What I'm going to do now is address the elephant in the room when it comes to programmable logic controllers or PLCs. When you get called out on these things, and let's say you have a process chiller or you have some other type of mechanical equipment, you go through all your normal mojo of checking out the refrigeration system, the electrical systems, you're looking for stuff that's burned, pitted, that kind of thing. After you go through that whole process, you find out that, wow, okay, there's something really going on here with this PLC. Now, that whole situation makes a lot of people really uptight, and it's understandable because the manufacturers out there are making changes to their PLC designs and form factors, and they're changing these things all the time. So you literally could have one type of PLC on a piece of equipment and the very next year have something totally different. So it's almost not impossible unless you're you work for a manufacturer. If you're a mechanical contractor or technician that works on all different types of equipment, it's just tough. It's a very anxiety-laden situation when you're pulled in to look at a machine and you've done all your stuff and you find out, all right, there's something going on with this PLC. This series that I'm doing is designed to at least get you jump-started, because the last thing that your customer wants to see you do is jump on the phone with the manufacturer and be standing there on their dime waiting for somebody to pick up the phone and help you troubleshoot this thing. So I'm going to show you some steps in a series of videos here, and this is the first installment today that you can follow to at least give you an idea on what the heck's going on. It's not that you're not going to eventually have to talk to the manufacturer. Matter of fact, most likely you will at some point. You just want to be able to have enough information to talk to that manufacturer and hopefully come to the solution faster than you normally would before you watch this series. So this is the first installment, as I said. In this particular episode, I'm talking about the types of PLCs out there. And I'm breaking this down as simple as I possibly can. There's two basic types of PLCs, and we're going to identify what those are in this episode. The benefit of knowing the two different types out there is going to be super important at the tail end of your diagnostic process, which I'm going to show you in this series, when you're having that all-important conversation with your customer or your boss about what needs to be done on this particular piece of equipment. If you're checking out this episode by way of notification on one of the social platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, or TikTok, just go ahead and click on the link provided and it'll jump you directly over to the ProcessChillerAcademy.com website, where you can check out this entire episode on both video and audio only formats. If you could do me a favor, and I know you've been asked this 1,000,001 times, please click the like in whatever platform that you're jumping over from. That helps tweak the algorithm and get the word out to more people. I'd really appreciate it if you would do that before you head over.